Why is this important for me today? Scarily, I've been working for 21 years with senior leaders at global level. So at 22, I started working with executives of a global organization, helping them find the soul of their organization. That was my first experience. And I learned a lot. And I kind of haven't stopped working with senior leaders, and I've just been fascinated by senior leaders, how they can try and unlock and shape and create the future. And I feel absolutely privileged of the experience I've had. I've met some amazing people all over the world, and I'm hungry to learn. But I'm also seeing something really dangerous happening. And I wouldn't have said this 4 or 5 years ago. And I know I'm nervous about saying it now, because my first response is, who am I to say that? But I'm going to say it, because that's what I experience, is I'm now seeing leaders getting in the way. Not with malicious intent, far from it. But the world is changing, and that's kind of so flippant to say. But there are so many things starting to converge, which I'll share in a minute. But I also get this data from lots of people. I'm reasonably well networked. People are saying people are getting stuck. And I'm even getting phone calls from CEOs of global organizations who are saying, look, I can see a future that I've never really understood. I don't really understand it. I'm really excited by it, but I do not have the tools. I do not have the things in my backpack to cope with it. I do not know how to do it. So there is also an increasing self-awareness into these leaders who have amazingly important positions that can change the world, who are now saying, I don't know how to do this and take this next step. So there is this ceiling, and I struggle to sometimes describe it. It's still forming for me. It's a ceiling of capability or capacity. It's a ceiling of awareness. It's a ceiling of how they choose or not to resource themselves. I don't mean that in HR resource. I mean how they resource themselves to go to the next level. And skill, subtle, complex skills. And I hear other people talk about the crisis of leadership. And this could just be my world and my misrepresentation, but I suspect not. So how do I choose to make meaning of this? This is my personal, and I'm just throwing this in the pot. This is some of the things I see, because I think a number of things are converging at the moment for leaders that make this really difficult. The name of the game isn't just performance and driving more from less. It is ever more innovation, shaping the future, stepping into the unknown, creating newness at sometimes scary pace. And how that newness has to have integrity to it, purpose to it. And some of the components that come with innovation being the core of what you do and how you shape the future is the ability to embrace the unknown. How do you, as a leader, work with failure rather than minimize failure? How do you work with risk and resilience, trust, creative tension? These are all actually quite subtle skills that people use and bandy around as language, but actually can't embody and bring it physically into space and into community. There is, for me, also the rise of integral culture, where more and more people are coming to work and wanting to find purpose and meaning in their work. They are values-driven. They move towards and gravitate towards shared purpose, values, and meaning, and they want to be part of creating meaning, and specifically talent. Your best talent are often driven by this. And that's a different world. To create a space in an organization as a leader where people can find meaning and purpose in their lives is a very big ask. As Bob Johansson said in our first dialogue, how he chooses to describe the nature of the world we live in, the VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. These are all things that 5 years ago, most leaders were trying to minimize and trying to navigate around. For me, these are now critical assets that just happen to be being forced on us at the moment. I think there's also a massive increase in dis-ease, the stress organisations and people individually are going under, the pressure of work and the work-life balance, which I think is another bigger topic, the increased poor diet, levels of fitness, what's the health and well-being side of organisations now to be able to face the future we need? That is a leadership challenge, not something you can ignore. That will implode. The limitations of conventional tools. I mean, having the luxury of going around organisations and the same strategic slides I see from one organisation to the other is amazing. It's almost the same looking, I mean, it's obviously different content and different numbers, but the actual thinking, the strategic thinking behind it, if I'm going to push the boundary, is one-dimensional. It's the same. It's not creating competitive advantage. So what is the next generation of strategy? Similarly, communications. I see communications just clumsily being reduced to messaging, as opposed to how do you use communication to take people on a journey where you have to inspire them, then you have to disrupt them, then you just have to listen. There are different dimensions to communications that are not being brought into the workplace that are really needed now. Once again, I stole off someone, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Once again, people are dancing around the culture bit. Is it too soft stuff? But actually, it's completely determining everything else, whether you like it or not. So how do you shape culture in a way that's generous and generative, integral? One that all of these excite me, but this particularly excites me. The interdependencies in the politics and everything for last few years. But for me, that increases the creative space between people. You suddenly now have different combinations of creative possibilities in the space between. How you turn that to your advantage is a critical leadership skill. And so the boundary of your organisation is starting to dissolve. It's actually much more complex value chains and ecosystems. So what does it mean to become an ecosystem leader? The power of diversity. Once again, I hear that over and over again, mostly from a political correct standpoint. But if you dig deeper, how you help your organisation value difference, how you develop empathy, and how you work with the power of emotion are all vital tools for the creative process. And lastly, distributed leadership on my list that I couldn't fit any more on. I've got a longer list. Non-local, working at distance, non-linear, the virtual world, truly global across 12 time zones. How do you do that then? And this isn't just happening for the financial crisis. This was all happening 3 or 4 years ago. It just happens to be amplified and compounded by it. So what we're beginning to see, as you would if you're not centered, your kind of grab response, we're seeing more fear-driven cultures, or I'm seeing more fear-driven cultures, where there's greater sense of unsafety. That fear response of reacting to the situation and the pressure of anger, blame, is creating certain moods, and we're going to come into that later. What is the mood of an organisation, and how do leaders shape mood? And mood stay with you in a physical sense. That leads to the desperate need to control everything. I'm good at that one. Where support is being seen as a sign of weakness. I'm seeing so many leaders at the top of systems who are not even interested, really, in developing or creating the time to develop themselves. I'm at the top of a system, I don't need to. It's really scary. I'd assumed it was a lifelong activity, but I'm not seeing that. And I'm seeing this pattern, as you would in this very bright, intellectual Western culture, very young, bright leaders taking over organizations because of their youth and their brightness. And they are super bright. Brains like a planet. But they're also A lot of their work is about masking what they're not good at. And everyone can see through it. And it's a really interesting phenomenon for me at the moment of leaders stepping up who have great, enormous assets, but they also have enormous weaknesses they're not willing to look at, and they mask it. And everyone can see it, and their credibility is going down and down and down. And this isn't just happening in business, that's my majority of my world. I see this and hear stories from education, health, government, intergovernment, or international governance, etc. I see this phenomenon happening at all levels. So, once again, here's me throwing in the pot some of the things I'm passionate about around this. The ability to ride the highs and lows of the creative process. We've been playing with that in previous dialogues. We're not playing it so much today, but actually, how do you get lost? How do you work with emotional tension and frustration? How do you see it part of the process? How do you help other people go through that roller coaster ride without saving them from it? Part of that for me is how leaders speed up and slow down time rather than being victims of time. I see too many organizations being victims of time. So how do you actually learn to master time and work with it? Slow it down, speed it up. How do you choreograph that as a leader? This is a quote I took from one of our clients, actually, who over dinner one day said, because I find it very difficult to talk about what we do, he said, so let me tell you what you do. You create the music of innovation. Your job is to create a frequency in an organization where, from that frequency, innovation can burst forth. It's an energetic tone, and that's going to be shared in other detail today. Ecosystem leadership, I've said, and one that's very close to my heart, the power of design. Design to make meaning. How do leaders learn to design things? How do you design a meeting and take people on a journey? How do you design a strategy that, once again, is a quest? How do you use the power of design in its classic disciplined form to create new meaning, new sense of loyalty? How do you co-create across boundaries using the power of the design process? So if I'm building up for what my dream of today is, that I'm hoping to call forth in the way I can, is how can we activate some of the subtle skills and capacity in ourselves today? Not the ones I'm listing, the ones that are important to you and that are needed now. It's both for me. What's important to you and what's needed now. How can we experiment today in this space of the few hours we have together to step forward? What is it going to take for everyone or anyone who's wanting to step forward today? What's that movement? It's a physical movement, not a physical movement, it's an inner movement. What's the movement needed today that you might be able to experiment with? This is a really diverse group, so how can we relish it? You're going to get some diverse inputs. They're going to come from different belief systems. How can you relish it rather than judge it? How can we start to activate the space between us? Work with pattern. For me, this is a vital part of pattern-based decision-making, pattern-based strategy. And how do we resource and source new ways of doing this? What are the sources that will resource us? It's something that most people completely forget. And I don't think so in the room. I think people in this room are very good at resourcing themselves. But what can we learn and pass on?